1% better every day does not make you 37 times better. You're not missing an engine other people were born with. You were handed the wrong unit of change. Anyone who's tried it knows that by February. Over the next 30 minutes, I'm going to give you 5 rules for building habits too small to fail. And the 4th one is about the 24 hours after you break a streak, which is where almost everybody actually loses it. Not on the day they miss, in the hours after. Because something inside that famous number is true, just not the part you were told. What's compounding was never your performance. Start with the arithmetic, because it deserves a fair hearing. 1.01 multiplied by itself 365 times lands at about 37.8. Run it the other way, 0.99 365 days over, and you finish near 0.03, 3% of what you started with. 2 lines on a graph, one climbing away, one falling into the floor, and it feels like a law of nature. It isn't. It's compound interest wearing a tracksuit. Money compounds forever because a balance has no ceiling and no biology. You have both. Nobody becomes 37 times better at push-ups, or at Spanish, or at listening to their partner, or at getting out of bed on a wet Monday.
Real skills rise fast at the start, then slow, then crawl. If that slogan has been holding your motivation together, I'd rather take it off you now, gently, than let it break on you in week 6. The number keeps circulating for a reason, though, and it isn't only that it sounds good in a boardroom. People sense something real underneath it. The arithmetic is simply describing the wrong object. Think about a sourdough starter. A spoonful of flour and a spoonful of water a day, stirred into a jar on a kitchen counter. At the end of a year, you don't have 365 spoonfuls. You have a living culture that works while you sleep, that has become more reliable the longer it's been fed, that behaves differently in your kitchen than it would in mine. And if you go away for 3 weeks and nobody feeds it, you come home to a jar of gray liquid and a smell you won't forget. That last part is the half of the math that is literally true. Decay is fast. Growth is slow. Nothing about that is fair, and everything about how you build a habit should be designed around it. You've probably heard the cycling story.
Dave Brailsford took over British cycling, and later a professional road team, and the account that spread everywhere was about hunting 1% improvements in everything. The pillows the riders slept on, the way they washed their hands, the paint inside the equipment truck so dust would show up against it. A program with almost no history at the Tour de France started winning it. Journalists have since argued that the story got oversold, and they have a point. Some of those gains were rounding errors, some were marketing. But the interesting part survives the debunking. They found 100 small improvements because they had built something that made small improvements visible and countable. The hunt was the gain. The measuring was the gain. Which means the question you've been asking about your own habits, was today big enough, has been grading you on a scale that has nothing to do with whether any of this works. Try a different one. Is this action cheaper to perform than it was last week? Less friction each time, and less argument with yourself in the doorway. That's the number that compounds. Your cost, not your output. And cost is exactly where it breaks for most people, because almost every plan you have ever made was priced for a version of you who doesn't show up very often. Picture a woman named Nadia. Hospital administrator, 41, 2 kids. The kind of person who is competent all day long on behalf of other people. On the 2nd of January, she starts. Alarm at 5:45. Gym bag packed the night before and set by the front door. 90 minutes before work, 5 days a week. She does 11 days straight. By day 8, she's telling a colleague she has never felt better. And she means it. Then, on the 12th night, her younger daughter is up with a fever until 1 in the morning. And Nadia is standing in a dark hallway holding a cold flannel to her forehead. And she gets back into bed at 1:10. At 6:04 the next morning, the alarm has already been snoozed twice. What she is deciding in that moment has nothing to do with exercise. She is deciding whether she is a person who does what she said she would do. And because the plan costs 90 minutes she does not have, at an energy level she does not have, the honest answer is no. That is the moment the habit dies. Not the missed session, but the precedent. A plan that has been successfully ignored once is only a suggestion. On day 14, the negotiation is easier, and by day 19, there is no negotiation at all. By the 2nd week of February, the shoes are back in the closet, and Nadia has added one more entry to a file she's been keeping quietly since she was about 23.
Evidence that I can't sustain anything. Most of us have that file. Some of us have been adding to it for decades. There's a model that explains this better than willpower ever has. B.J. Fogg, who runs a behavior design lab at Stanford, describes a behavior as happening when three things arrive at the same moment: motivation, ability, and a prompt. All three. Miss any one of them and nothing happens, no matter how badly you want it. Of those three, motivation is the one you cannot control. It's weather. It blows in from somewhere. It's high on the 2nd of January and low on the 12th of February. And it's affected by your sleep, your blood sugar, and an email that landed at 4 in the afternoon. You can influence it slightly. You cannot schedule it. So you have two options. Build a house that only stands in good weather, then blame yourself every time it rains. Or engineer the two variables that actually belong to you: how easy the thing is, and whether something reliably reminds you to do it. Read your last 4 failed attempts through that lens for a moment. Every one of them was an engineering error, a structure that required good weather in a life that doesn't supply it. Which sounds like an argument for wanting less. It's an argument for lowering something far more specific, and your ambition is not it.
There's one field where nobody argues with this logic, and it's worth borrowing. 6 days after knee surgery, no physiotherapist tells a patient to run 5 kilometers. They say, bend the knee 10 degrees, twice today. That's the whole prescription. The patient, who ran half marathons a year ago, finds it insulting. 11 months later, that person is back on a pitch, and every single degree of that recovery was bought in increments that felt like nothing at the time. Nobody in that clinic called the patient unambitious. Nobody suggested they lacked drive. The smallness was the design, and the design worked. Bring that into an ordinary life. A man named Marcus, 43, laid off in the spring from a job he'd held for 11 years. He used to write. He wants to write again, and he has failed at it 4 separate times against a target of 1,000 words a day, a target he once hit for 9 days running, which he still thinks about more than he'd admit. This time the commitment is 1 sentence, at the kitchen table, before the laptop connects to anything. Most mornings he writes his sentence and closes the notebook, and it feels absurd, and he does it anyway. Perhaps one morning in 5, the sentence keeps going, and he looks up and there are 600 words, and the coffee's gone cold. The 600 words are overflow. The commitment stayed 1 sentence. The moment he starts counting on the overflow, he's back to a 1,000-word target wearing a disguise, and it collapses in the first bad week. You've probably been told this takes 21 days. That number has no study behind it. It traces back to a plastic surgeon named Maxwell Maltz, who wrote in 1960 that his patients seemed to need about 3 weeks to get used to their new face in the mirror. An observation from a consulting room, not a finding. The actual research arrived half a century later. Philippa Lally and colleagues at University College London followed people forming everyday habits and found a median of roughly 66 days to reach the point where a behavior felt automatic. That's the figure people quote. But the part worth your attention is the spread. 18 days at one end, 254 at the other. That range is the honest answer to how long will this take. Longer than you were told, and wildly variable in ways you cannot predict from the inside, which is precisely why the daily cost has to sit near 0. If the habit is affordable, a 200-day timeline is survivable. If it's expensive, you'll quit somewhere around day 30 and conclude something false about your character. So that's the first rule.
Write down the smallest version of your habit that you could complete on the worst realistic day of your year, the sick child day, the day the deadline moves. Make it the actual promise, not the fallback you retreat to on bad days. You're pouring a floor, the ceiling stays exactly where it was, and a floor is what you can still stand on when the ceiling is out of reach. But a floor has to exist somewhere in an actual day, and this is where small habits die a second death, not because they were too big, but because they had nowhere to live. Ruth is a hospital pharmacist, and for 2 years she intended to learn Portuguese in the evenings. She had the app, she had the podcast, and a grammar book with a cracked spine from being opened at page 1. 2 years. Total progress? Close to nothing. Discipline had nothing to do with it. The evening is not a time. It's a rumor, a stretch of hours everyone assumes is theirs, where several other things already live, and none of them need deciding on because they arrive by themselves. What changed for Ruth was small and slightly ridiculous.
She now opens the app when the kettle clicks off before she pours. 10 minutes standing at the counter with the mug waiting, most nights, because the kettle is more reliable than her resolve. The kettle has never once failed to click off.
The research name for this is implementation intentions, Peter Gallwitzer's work on if-then plans that specify exactly when and where a thing will happen. There's a study on exercise, published by Milne, Orbel, and Sheeran in 2002, that makes the point plainly. One group received motivational material about the health benefits of exercise. Another group received the same material, then wrote a single sentence naming when and where they would exercise. The first group followed through at around a third, the second roughly 9 in 10. Same information, same wish to be healthier. The only difference was that one group had answered the question in advance, on paper, before the moment arrived. Pair that with what Wendy Wood's research at the University of Southern California suggests about ordinary life. Something like 43% of what people do on a given day is performed in the same context, more or less on autopilot. That sounds bleak the first time you hear it, nearly half your life running on rails you don't remember laying. Turn it over, though. It means your day already has a skeleton, a set of moments that occur with mechanical reliability whether or not you're inspired. There's the kettle, the seatbelt, the badge scan at the door, the particular silence after the last bedroom door closes. You are not building a habit from scratch in open space. You're hanging one small thing on a bone that's already there. So the second rule is a sentence with 3 parts, and every vague intention you own should be rewritten into it. After something that already happens without my involvement, I will do the tiny version, at a specific physical place. After the kettle clicks off, I will open the app, standing at the kitchen counter. If you can't name the cue, you don't have a habit yet. You have a wish with good manners. And once a habit has an address, one last thing decides whether you actually turn up to it. It has almost nothing to do with how much you want it. It's measured in seconds. 2 people share a flat. Both play guitar. Both, if you ask them, are equally keen. Same age, same taste, both entirely sincere about wanting to get better. One keeps her guitar on a stand beside the sofa. The other keeps his in a hard case under the bed, with the capo in a kitchen drawer and the strap in a box at the back of the wardrobe. Nothing else about them differs. 12 months later, one of them plays most days and has quietly become good. The other has a story about how he used to play. The whole 12 months of difference is about 11 seconds. Run that lever backwards and it works just as well on the habits you'd like to be rid of.
Charging the phone in the hallway instead of on the bedside table requires nothing of your character. It requires you to stand up. And standing up at 11:40 at night in a cold flat turns out to be an effective moral philosophy. There's a study I think about often. Anne Thorndike and colleagues at Massachusetts General Hospital ran an intervention in the hospital cafeteria, published in 2012. They added traffic light labels to the food and rearranged the drinks, so that water sat at eye level near the registers, and the sugary drinks were harder to reach. Sugary drink sales fell. Water rose. No lectures, no education campaign. In a building full of doctors who already knew everything there is to know about sugar. They moved the bottles, and everyone in that cafeteria felt like they were making free choices. They were. Nobody was stopped. Nobody was told no. The choices simply got easier in one direction than the other, and that was enough to move an entire building. So the third rule, this week, change nothing about how much you want anything. Pick one habit you want and one you don't, and alter only the physical friction. Count the seconds, the steps, the doors, the containers between you and the thing. Take the lid off one and put a lid on the other. Don't try to want it more. Make it downhill.
Everything so far has assumed that the point of a small habit is the behavior itself. 4 minutes of stretching, 10 minutes of Portuguese, 1 sentence at a kitchen table before the browser opens. That assumption is wrong, and it's the reason small habits work out of all proportion to their size. The behavior is evidence. Whatever it produces is a side effect. Picture a courtroom in which you are both the defendant and the jury, and the case being heard is the only one that has ever really mattered to you. Who this person actually is, not who they say they are, who they are. Now consider what a jury will accept. Your intentions are hearsay, struck from the record. Your plans are hearsay, every one of them, however detailed. What you told your friend in January is hearsay. The vision board is not evidence. A 4-minute action performed on a bad Tuesday is admissible. It is very nearly the only thing that is, which explains something that has probably confused you for years. You cannot argue your way into a new identity, and affirmations barely move it either, Because the part of you that decides who you are was never listening to what you say. It has been watching what you do, patiently, with the flat attention of someone who has heard the speech before. The verdict changes slowly, by submission. It cannot be rushed by feeling strongly about it.
That's why the most sincere January of your life produced nothing at all. There's a finding here small enough to use today. Vanessa Patrick and Henrik Hogtvedt published research in the Journal of Consumer Research in 2012, comparing two ways of refusing something you're tempted by. I can't versus I don't. I can't have that. I don't eat that. The people using I don't held out substantially better. The wording does real work. I can't describes an external restriction imposed on somebody who would rather be doing otherwise, a prisoner reporting the rules. I don't is a statement about the kind of person speaking. One requires ongoing resistance, the other closes the question. Underneath that sits an older idea. Daryl Bem's self-perception theory from the early 1970s proposed that we work out our own attitudes partly by observing our own behavior, inferring what we must believe from what we watch ourselves do, roughly the way we'd size up a stranger at a party. So the small act is doing two jobs at once. It produces whatever it produces, and it files testimony. There's a moment that comes to people who stay with something tiny, and it arrives long before any result does.
6 weeks into a 4-minute morning stretch, 4 minutes on a rug before the kettle, a man in his 50s catches himself in a Thursday afternoon meeting mentally rearranging tomorrow's schedule so those 4 minutes won't get squeezed out. He isn't consciously committed to anything. He'd be faintly embarrassed to describe the habit out loud. It's 4 minutes. Nothing about his body has visibly changed. His back is exactly as stiff as it was in May. But the habit has started making claims on the rest of his life. It has begun to defend itself. That's what a habit does long before it produces a single visible result, which is why the people who abandon things at week 6 are usually abandoning them right after they started working and just before there was any way to tell. So name the 2-word verdict you're arguing for, then pick the smallest daily act a jury would admit as evidence for it. And when you decline something, use the identity out loud, not I can't, I don't. Which brings us to the day it goes wrong, because it will, and not in some distant hypothetical week, inside the first month, on a Tuesday, for a reason so ordinary you'll be almost offended by it. Everything you have built up to that point gets decided in the hours afterwards, and hardly anyone has decided in advance what they're going to do.
Ask a piano teacher what separates the students who will perform from the ones who won't, and some of them will tell you it comes down to a rule about mistakes. When you fumble a bar, don't stop. Don't sigh. Don't go back to the beginning. Play the next note, in time. Because amateurs, without realizing it, spend years practicing restarting. They rehearse the opening bars hundreds of times and the middle of the piece a handful. Professionals practice recovering, and the difference shows up on a stage where nobody gets to go back to the top. The same pattern runs through the rest of life with almost no modification. Janet Polivy and Peter Herman did classic work on what's been nicknamed the what the hell effect. Dieters who were led to believe they'd already broken their diet went on to eat considerably more than dieters who hadn't, even when the actual breach was trivial, a milkshake that mattered nothing nutritionally. The damage came from the sense of having broken something. Once the record was no longer clean, the day got filed as a write-off, and behavior followed the filing. Claire Adams and Mark Leary ran a study in 2007 in which people were given a brief, kind message after a dietary lapse. Essentially, everyone slips. This is normal. Don't be hard on yourself. Those people went on to eat less afterwards.
Gentleness turned out to be the option that worked, measurably on behavior, and not merely on the feelings. Hold that against the last 10 years of your own practice. The self-criticism you've been administering after every missed week in the belief that it was keeping you honest, the private commentary about how you always do this, how you were never going to see it through, has been part of the machinery rather than the correction. It doesn't restore the habit. It makes the next lapse bigger. And there's a device that makes all of this worse, and it's on your phone right now, glowing green. A counter reading 214 turns one missed day into a demolition. You didn't lose a day, you lost 214. That number was doing something valuable for you, right up until the moment it became the most expensive possible way to interpret an ordinary Tuesday. So decide the protocol now, while nothing has gone wrong, because you will not be capable of deciding it in the moment. The protocol has 3 parts. Never miss twice, a rule James Clear put into 3 words, and one the pianists got to first. Call it the next note rule. You don't go back to the top of the piece. You play the bar you're in. 1 missed day is an event. 2 is the beginning of a different life, and the gap between them is the entire game. Make the return trip half size.
If the floor is 10 minutes, the day after a miss is 5. 5 minutes achieves nothing in itself. It matters because coming back at full size during a bad week is how people fail to come back at all. And if you must count something, count the days you missed this month rather than the days you've strung together. A lapse then costs you 1 point instead of your whole history. That's the 4th rule, and it's the one I'd keep if you made me throw away the other 4. Lapsing isn't the biggest problem you have. It's the only one that is guaranteed. A system without a recovery protocol is just a streak waiting to end. Even with all 4 in place, though, there's a stretch coming that breaks more people than any single bad Tuesday. It isn't dramatic. That's exactly what makes it dangerous. You're doing the work, everything is running, and nothing whatsoever is happening. Every language learner knows the shape of it. Months of flashcards, podcasts you understand roughly none of, playing while you cook, in a language that still sounds like one long uninterrupted word. Whole weeks where you'd swear you were getting worse. And then an ordinary morning, radio on in the background while you're doing something else entirely, and a full sentence goes past and you understood it. Not translated in your head, simply understood, half a second before you notice that you did.
Nothing special happened that morning. You didn't cross a line on that particular day. The comprehension had been assembling for months, out of sight, and the evidence arrived late and all at once. Anne Grabiel's work at MIT on the basal ganglia found that the brain chunks repeated sequences into single automatic units, a run of separate actions collapsing into one thing you no longer have to assemble piece by piece, and those patterns are retained even after the behavior stops. That cuts both ways, and both halves are worth saying out loud. It's why relapse is so fast. 3 days back into an old routine, and it feels like you never left, because the old route is still paved, and paving doesn't wash away. It's also why rebuilding after a collapse is faster than starting cold. It is the most useful thing you can know on a 5th attempt. You are not back at 0. You have never once been back at 0. Every previous attempt, the 11 days of 5:45 alarms, the 9 days of 1,000 words, the 2 years of intending to learn Portuguese in the evenings, laid something down that is still there. The reason the 5th attempt feels familiar is that you are not building on bare ground. So during the flat stretch, change what you measure. Track inputs only. Did I hit the floor today? Yes or no?
Not the weight, not the word count, not whether you felt any different this morning. Those things arrive when they arrive, and checking for them daily is how people talk themselves out of a system that is working. And when do you make it bigger? Because you'll want to. Usually around day 9, in the middle of a good week, which is the worst possible time. Somewhere in week 7, Ruth notices she is bored at the kettle. 10 minutes of Portuguese standing at the counter has stopped feeling like anything at all. No resistance, no small negotiation while the water comes up, nothing to push against. That is the reading you have been waiting for. Boredom is the price finally hitting 0, the whole objective, arriving disguised as the reason to stop. That's the 5th rule. Expand the floor only after the current floor has felt boring for 2 straight weeks, and expand it by an amount so small that you'd still do it on your worst day. Most people read that boredom as the end of something. They quit at precisely the moment the thing started working. Which brings me back to what I said at the start. That something inside that famous number is true, just not the part you were told. 3 things compound, and none of them is your performance. The first is cost.
Every repetition makes the next one slightly cheaper, less deliberation and less bargaining in the doorway, until one evening you're standing at the counter with the app already open and you don't remember having decided anything. The second is evidence. Every repetition files one more admissible piece of testimony in the case about who you are, and that verdict quietly changes what you attempt next, which changes what becomes available to you. And the third is the one that actually earns the word. The paving stays.
Whatever you laid down remains laid down, through the bad month, through the collapse, through the year you didn't touch it. So while your performance is bounded and will plateau, and will never be 37 times anything, the road underneath it only ever accumulates. You've been building road this whole time and grading yourself on speed. So here they are again, in the order they came. The kettle clicking off. One sentence at a kitchen table before the browser opens. A guitar left out on a stand instead of zipped into a case under a bed. A knee bending 10 degrees twice, 11 months away from a football pitch. None of that is impressive. None of it would survive being said out loud at a dinner party. Nobody rebuilds a life in a decision.
Lives get rebuilt in unremarkable hours by a version of you that nobody is watching and nobody is applauding, doing something so small it would embarrass you to describe it. So change the question. Not what can I do today? Anyone can do a lot today, and you've proved that 11 days running, more than once. The question is, what can I do every day, including the bad ones, including the night the fever doesn't break, including the 12th of February? Answer that one question before you go to sleep tonight, and make the answer small enough that it feels like cheating. That feeling is the point. It means you finally priced the thing for the person who actually has to pay for it. And a year from now, you won't remember the day it turned. There won't be one. That's the shape of how this works, and it's the reason you could never find the moment when other people changed. If this was worth your half hour, stay with us. There's more here on discipline, on patience, on the quieter mechanics of change, and the next one is already waiting. Subscribe if you'd like it to find you. For tonight, just choose the small thing, then go to bed.